Hello, my name is Claire Sanderson, and for most of my life, I believed loyalty to my family would be enough to earn my place. But the night they shut me out of the hotel that carried our name, I realized I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was just an obstacle in their empire. That humiliation burned deep, yet it became the spark that drove me to build something they could never take away. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment your thoughts below. Type 1 if you resonate with this story. If this kind of story resonates with you, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us keep telling the stories that matter. Let's begin. They didn't just throw me out of the hotel, they slammed the door on my childhood, my dignity, and every ounce of loyalty I had ever given them. The words rang inside me as if I'd already heard them before. The Sanderson Hotel, once the shimmering heart of downtown Chicago, looked tired now. Velvet drapes, dulled brass handrails, tarnished marble floors streaked with salt from boots dragging in the March snow. Guests clustered in the lobby, coats dripping their whispers sharp enough to cut. And yet, as I pushed open the revolving door, I felt a surge of hope. This was the place where I had learned to count change behind the front desk, where I had run room service trays down carpeted halls. I told myself I belonged here even after all the years away. I caught sight of a familiar face, Elena Carter, once the most respected front office manager in the city. She had been demoted long ago after defending me when I was just a teenager with ideas bigger than my place at the table. She hesitated, tray of keys in her hand, her eyes widening before softening with something like sorrow. I smiled at her, tried to sound casual. It's been a long time. She opened her mouth to answer, but a voice cut through the lobby. This isn't your business anymore. My father's voice, harsh, cold, commanding as ever. Richard Sanderson stood near the staircase in his pressed suit hair gone silver, but his glare untouched. Beside him, Brian, my brother taller now, with a smirk that matched the memory of every time he'd been handed what I had earned. He looked at me the way a cat looks at a cornered bird. I tried to hold steady. I came back to talk to see how the hotel was faring. My voice felt too loud in the silence that followed. Some guests tilted their heads curious. Employees froze with clipboards in hand. Brian stepped forward, polished shoes tapping like a gavel. Policy is clear, he said, every syllable dripping with authority he had not earned. Only current staff and management are permitted in administrative areas. You're neither. He gestured to the two security guards by the door. Escort her out. My stomach twisted. For a moment, I thought my mother might intervene. Elaine, always the softer one, but she stood behind my father, eyes, downcast lips, trembling without a word. That silence hurt worse than Brian's command. I turned toward the employees, searching for an ally. Elena's gaze locked with mine. She didn't speak. Couldn't, but her eyes were alive with the apology she dared not give. Around us, the murmur of guests rose, fragments audible. Isn't she family? Why would they do this in public? I thought she belonged here. The guards hesitated as if they too felt the weight of the moment, but Brian's smirk sharpened. Don't make me repeat myself. I took a step back. My father's cane struck the marble floor, the sound like a final verdict. He looked at me with disdain so pure it hollowed me out. You will never set foot in this hotel again. It wasn't the first time I'd heard those words. Years ago, when I'd presented a plan for loyalty programs and online booking strategies, he had laughed in my face, said hotels weren't about gimmicks. The sting then had been private behind closed doors, but now he delivered it in front of staff, in front of guests, in front of everyone who mattered in this building. My throat burned, but I forced myself not to cry. If they wanted humiliation, I would give them defiance instead. The guards escorted me to the revolving door, their hands light, almost respectful. Cold air sliced in as I stepped onto the sidewalk. Snow spiraled down, clinging to my coat. I lifted my eyes to the glowing sign above the awning, Sanderson Legacy, since 1950. The letters flickered against the storm, bold and merciless. I whispered to the family who had just exiled me to the walls that had once been my home. You'll regret underestimating me. The night they shut me out was the night I stopped being their daughter and started being their competition. I wrote those words into the margin of an old spiral notebook, the same one where my teenage self had scribbled hotel ideas nobody wanted to hear. Page after page of loyalty programs, Technology upgrades, guest experience notes, all dismissed as childish nonsense. Yet, as I stared at the fading ink, I knew those foolish sketches would one day become the blueprint of something greater. Cornell welcomed me with icy winds and brick arches. I arrived in 2014 with 2 suitcases, a scholarship, and the raw ache of being cut from my family's legacy. Days were lectures, nights were front desk shifts at the Statler Hotel. I balanced textbooks with Linen's customer smiles with exhaustion. While my father claimed I would never learn the real business I was learning from the ground up revenue management at 2 a.m., conflict resolution with angry guests, how to turn data into action. Every rejection from home hardened me into something sharper. By junior year, I worked weekends at the Athena, an independent luxury property in Ithaca. There, I met Victoria Hale, the general manager with silver-streaked hair and eyes that seemed to read through excuses. She spotted me staying late, poring over occupancy reports. "You're already ready," she said one night, tapping my notebook filled with scribbles. "The only question is when you'll bet on yourself." The words burned into me, a prophecy I wasn't sure I could fulfill. Graduation in 2018 brought a choice: join an established chain or risk anonymity in New York's vast hotel world. I chose the city. I rotated through housekeeping events, revenue analytics at a Park Avenue property. The work was endless, the city ruthless, but I absorbed everything: predictive booking models, staff training systems, even the psychology of lobby design. Rejection still followed me. 26 investors turned down my dream of opening a boutique hotel. Too young, too risky, not credible without a man beside me. Each no weighed heavier, but none broke me. Then came Daniel Whitmore, a retired developer with a habit of listening more than speaking. We met in a cramped cafe in Brooklyn, my business plan spread across a sticky table. He didn't laugh at my projections or dismiss my passion. "The old guard is dying," he said after 3 hours. "You're the future. Let's build it." With his backing and my savings, I signed a lease for a failing property in Brooklyn. Months blurred into renovations. I painted walls alongside contractors, chose linens, and wrote training manuals at dawn. I christened it the Aurora for the light that breaks through after the darkest night. Our concept was simple but daring: boutique charm, efficient tech warmth that chains couldn't replicate. Opening week was quiet, almost terrifying. But word spread, bloggers posted, guests returned, occupancy climbed. Within 6 months, we were at 90%, outperforming veterans. Journalists called it a hidden gem, and suddenly the same investors who had once rejected me returned, eager to claim a share of what they had scorned. I should have felt triumphant. But success was threaded with exhaustion. Nights ended on the office couch, my phone buzzing with guest surveys, my body craving sleep. Loneliness gnawed too. Victory is sharp when no family calls to share it. Still, every number on the revenue report proved me right. I belonged here. In late 2019, the Hospitality Review ran a feature: Aurora Hotels, a rising name in boutique luxury. My photo stared back at me from the glossy page. I clipped the article, slid it into the same notebook where my teenage plans still lived, and smiled. That night, skimming an industry trade report, a line caught my eye. Sanderson hotel occupancy drops below 40%. I set the paper down, the chill of Chicago's winter echoing in my chest, though I sat in Brooklyn's warmth. "The cracks are showing," I whispered, and I knew the story was far from over. When my mother's voice trembled over the phone, I knew the empire I had built was about to collide with the one that had cast me out. Her words cracked through the late-night quiet of my New York office. I had stayed long after the team left the skyline, a jagged silhouette of steel and light. Elaine rarely called. When she did, it was on birthdays or Christmas, always brief, always careful. This time, her tone carried desperation, the kind I hadn't heard even in my worst childhood memories. She confessed debts that could no longer be disguised, whispered of a spa renovation Brian had pushed through with kickbacks from contractors, and admitted the bank had begun sending warnings about missed payments. I listened without interrupting, steadying my breath. The irony of Richard's words from years ago rang in my head, his vow that I would never set foot in his hotel again. Yet here it was, fate opening a door he had slammed shut, and me holding the power to walk through, not as his daughter, but as the buyer. I promised my mother nothing on that call, only told her to stay calm. When she hung up, I stared at the polished oak table, the reflection of city lights shimmering on its surface like a stage waiting for actors. The next morning, I convened my team. Laura Bennett arrived first, crisp suit eyes sharp as a blade. She flipped open her tablet, already aware of what I was going to propose. Jasmine Lee followed, her calm demeanor masking an instinct for crisis PR that rivaled generals preparing for war. Michael Torres sat in the corner, still junior, still too young to realize he was in the middle of a corporate coup that would rewrite my family's name. "We acquire them," I said simply. No preamble, no doubt. "Not as Aurora, not as Claire Sanderson. We form a holding company neutral on paper. They'll never know it's me until I decide to tell them." Laura's lips curved in the faintest smile. "Then we'll need a watertight SPA. Clawback provisions. A material adverse change clause tight enough to strangle them if they try to renege. And a non-disparagement clause to keep their mouths shut once they realize who pulled the strings." I nodded. Jasmine spoke next. "And when the press asks why Aurora is circling Chicago, we say nothing. The narrative must remain this is a faceless investment group expanding in the Midwest. If your father or brother suspects the deal collapses, for weeks we orchestrated in shadows. My days were a blur of Aurora's growing empire. My nights were calls with lawyers buried in clauses that would become my hidden arsenal. Each draft of the contract came back thicker, denser until it felt less like a business deal and more like siege warfare written in legalese. Every page was a trapdoor my family wouldn't see until too late. Meanwhile, reports from Chicago painted decay. The Sanderson Hotel once glittered, but now carpets were frayed, elevators stalled mid-floor, and guests fled to newer properties. Occupancy slid below 45%. Banks grew impatient. Brian ranted in local interviews about tradition, while contractors whispered about unpaid bills. Still, he resisted every whisper of selling, convinced some miracle season would save him. But foreclosure loomed, and the bank knew it. In late August, pressure mounted. My attorney Laura flew to Chicago to negotiate. I watched each session via encrypted link, Richard's face hard but lined with fatigue, Brian's bravado cracking under the weight of numbers he couldn't bend. Elaine sat silently behind them, eyes lowered, as if afraid her glance might reveal the truth. At one point, Brian slammed his fist on the table. "We don't need vultures tearing apart our legacy," he barked. The bank's representative leaned in coldly. "Without capital, your legacy ends in 60 days. Even Richard flinched. His pride had carried him through decades, but no pride could pay loans. The next session, he arrived, quieter papers trembling slightly in his hands. After weeks of sparring, he grudgingly signed. On a Friday morning in September, I sat alone in my office screen, glowing with the feed from Chicago. I watched as my father and brother scribbled their signatures across the contract Laura had crafted like a scalpel. Brian exhaled with relief, thinking he had salvaged what was left. Richard forced a smile as if pretending he was still in control. They had no idea the faceless entity on the other side of the deal was me, the daughter they had cast aside. The moment their pens left the page, I felt the axis of my life shift. The Sanderson legacy, their fortress of exclusion, was now mine. Legally. Irrevocably. They believed they had secured salvation. In truth, they had handed me their crown. That evening, I boarded a quiet flight to Chicago under an alias, slipping into the city without fanfare. At dawn, I stood across the street from the hotel where my childhood had unfolded. Cranes lifted metal groaned, and the old sign, Sanderson Legacy, since 1950, was unbolted from its perch. The name that had been weaponized against me descended slowly like an old tyrant stripped of its throne. The wind cut through my coat, but I didn't shiver. I watched until the last bolt came free, until the name that had defined and rejected me was nothing more than a heap of metal on the ground. Then softly, almost to myself, I whispered, "Legacy is mine now." The chandeliers blazed, the champagne sparkled, and my family had no idea they were standing in a hotel that I owned. The lobby no longer resembled the faded monument where they had once exiled me. The marble gleamed under polished light, a soaring atrium lifted the eye, and a chandelier of glass and steel rained fire across the crowd. Music drifted from a string quartet tucked beside the staircase, the sound carried upward to a gallery filled with journalists, investors, and the city's elite. Every surface had been redone velvet, replaced with linen brass recast air sharp with citrus and cedar. This was no longer their domain. It was mine, though they didn't yet know it. I saw them as soon as they entered. Richard walked stiff as cane, more pronounced than last year, but his stare still cold. Brian prowled at his side chin, high arrogance wrapped like a cloak. Elaine trailed them pearls at her throat, her smile small and brittle. They believed they were guests of honor invited by anonymous new owners. They moved with entitlement, not knowing every step was under my control. Michael Torres worked the floor greeting dignitaries, gesturing at the architectural features he had overseen. The staff glided around him, trained to perfection their greetings, confident their eyes alive. Even Ellen Carter was here, reintroduced as guest experience consultant. She moved quietly, observing, but when her gaze brushed mine, she nodded acknowledgement without words. The buzz in the air was electric. Investors admired the transformation. City officials spoke of economic renewal. Photographers snapped the gilded details of the atrium. None of them knew the full story, the humiliation in this very building, Richard's decree that I would never step foot inside again. Tonight, I stepped not as a daughter begging for recognition, but as the architect of its rebirth. When the string quartet paused, a hush settled. Lights tightened on the stage. I walked forward in a fitted black dress, every movement measured. The microphone picked up the click of my heels, then my voice. I spoke of history, of legacy, of resilience. I honored the past while introducing the future, described a vision of hospitality that was more than service. It was memory, it was belonging. Faces in the crowd leaned forward, drinks forgotten, cameras raised. And then I dropped the line that split the room open. I am Claire Sanderson, owner of Aurora Hotels Group and this hotel. The words fell like a thunderclap. Gasps rippled through the lobby. Photographers erupted flashes, igniting like fireworks. Richard's face drained of color, his lips thin as paper. Brian stiffened, fury boiling across his features, his fist clenching, though he forced himself still. Elaine's eyes filled tears, catching in the light as she looked anywhere but at me. Around them, whispers swirled, the estranged daughter, the exile, the new queen. I left the stage to a storm of questions. Journalists crowded near microphones, thrust forward. I smiled, answered calmly, spoke of the future of Aurora and the promise of Chicago. I gave them numbers, plans, optimism, never gloating, never cruel. But every syllable pressed against my family like a stone, a reminder of the reversal they had never imagined. Backstage, the air was thicker, stripped of applause. Richard confronted me in the presidential suite, the same room where he once hosted governors. His voice trembled with anger. You betrayed us. You waited until we were weak and stole what was ours. I met his fury with calm. I saved it. You were days from foreclosure. The debts, the kickbacks, the missed payments, you know the truth. Brian's rage burst past restraint. This was our heritage. You bought it with lies. You think contracts make you family? I placed the papers on the glass table, debt ledgers, the bank's notices, the spa invoices with inflated costs. These aren't lies, I said softly. These are your signatures. And without me, they would have been your ruin. Elaine stood apart, her hand covering her mouth, torn between pride and grief. Silence hung until Richard turned away, shoulders heavy, words lost. Brian stormed out his fury, unable to change the ink already dry. The next morning, the drama spilled into daylight. Richard and Brian stormed the front desk, their old VIP cards in hand, demanding access to offices, shouting at staff. Confusion swept the lobby guests, pausing mid-checkout employees, frozen between old masters and new. I stepped forward, my voice cutting clear through the noise. Section 3.2, deactivate access. They are residents, not managers. They couldn't accept losing the hotel, so they tried to destroy me in court. By dawn, the courthouse steps were already lined with cameras. Headlines bloomed on every screen in the city, daughter secretly takes over family hotel. I let them take their pictures and said nothing. In our war room the night before, Laura had rehearsed our moves like a conductor. Jasmine had prepped talking points we hoped we wouldn't need. And Ellen had sat with folded hands, steady as a lighthouse. We knew the scandal would trend. We counted on the law to cut through the noise. Inside, fluorescent lights flattened everyone to the same shade. Brian arrived first, jaw tight, new tie, too bright. Richard trailed him, proud posture masking a tremor in the hands. Elaine took a back row seat, eyes swollen from a night of arguments I could practically script. I fixed my attention on the counsel table, the thick binder Laura had built, and the printed SPA clauses that had been foreshadowed like weapons waiting for the right battlefield. Brian's lawyers opened with a performance that I had fraudulently concealed my identity, that the deal would never have closed if my family had known who was behind the shell company, that I had orchestrated a hostile takeover dressed up as mercy. The words landed with tabloid drama. The judge's face did not change. Beside me, Laura kept one finger marking a page and another tapping the table at a slow, unhurried beat. Counsel, the judge said when Brian's side finally paused for air, point me to the paragraph of the agreement that required the buyer to disclose the natural person behind the holding entity. Silence is a difficult suit to wear. Brian's lawyer almost fit into it. Your Honor, it goes to intent paragraph. The judge repeated. There is no such paragraph, Laura said, standing. There is, however, a non-disparagement clause, section 10.4, a clawback provision at 8.7 triggered by pre-closing fraud, and a material adverse change clause 9.2, all negotiated at arm's length. The sellers were represented by counsel, signed the agreement, and accepted consideration above market to preserve staff and avoid foreclosure. We'll gladly walk through each clause. We did. Laura's voice sharpened to a scalpel as she traced the deal's anatomy. The bank notices the covenants already breached the spa invoices that swelled like a bruise. Then she clicked to the email thread. On the screens, Brian's words appeared in crisp black. She's a washed-out ex-employee riding a PR wave. If we stall staff schedules, we can spook guests and tank her numbers before closing. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Laura didn't pause. Same thread, Your Honor. Another email bloomed. Contractor will take care of the spa overages. We sign the change orders. The money rounds back. Don't worry, Dad, this is how deals get done. The judge leaned closer, reading twice. Richard clenched his jaw. Brian shifted in his chair and tried to look bored. Sweat traced his hairline anyway. Your Honor, Laura continued. These are pre-closing communications. If the court finds this constitutes fraud or bad faith, the clawback clause is available to my client. But today we're here because Mr. Sanderson seeks to undo a validly executed agreement by assigning a disclosure burden the contract never required. Objection to characterization. Brian's attorney said, voice thinning. Overruled, the judge said. Proceed. Jasmine had warned me the court of public opinion would crave a simpler story than clauses and covenants. So we made it simple. Ellen took the stand. She smoothed her skirt, glanced at me once, then faced the courtroom. I worked at the Sanderson for 22 years, she said. When Claire proposed loyalty programs as a teenager, I defended the idea. After that, I was sidelined. Later, when I advocated for modernizing systems, I was told I wasn't a team player. I left after Brian cut front desk staffing and demanded we ignore guest complaints to protect margins. He mocked Claire to vendors and the bank. It wasn't just unkind. It was bad business. Were you forced out? Laura asked. I was given a choice that wasn't one, Ellen answered, voice steady. And when I refused to falsify a maintenance log to hide outages, my schedule was cut until I couldn't afford rent. I watched the jurors, not that we had one, but people read judges the same way, and saw heads tilt, eyes narrow, a collective reappraisal flicker across the room. Facts need a face. Ellen gave them one. Brian's attorney tried to claw back ground. Ms. Carter, are you aware that Ms. Sanderson purchased the hotel through a shell to hide her identity? Ellen didn't flinch. I'm aware she saved every job in that building. When cross ended, Laura returned to the text. Your Honor, Section 10.4 states, the parties agree not to make any public or private statement that disparages the other party, its officers, or its business practices. We submit that Mr. Brian Sanderson's communications with lenders, vendors, and media, after signing calling my client a fraud, urging sabotage, violate this clause. We further submit that the claim of fraud by concealment is legally unsound. No such duty to disclose exists in this SPA, and all parties were represented by counsel. Brian stood up as if pulled by a wire. She tricked us if we'd known it was Claire. The judge held up a hand. Sit down, Mr. Sanderson. When he didn't, two deputies took a step forward. He sat. Laura finished with the numbers, the foreclosure timeline the bank had documented, the cash burn, the debt schedule that made hope irrelevant. They did not lose a hotel, she said quietly. They lost the illusion that pride could pay creditors. My client bought them time, dignity, and continuity. The judge removed their glasses and folded them like punctuation. I have read the agreement. I have listened to the arguments. There is no contractual requirement for disclosure of the ultimate beneficial owner. The request for an injunction is denied. The complaint is dismissed with prejudice. Counsel for the defense may submit a proposed order regarding enforcement of Section 10(4) if further disparagement occurs. Sound returned to the room all at once. Paper shuffling a cough, the muted flash of a camera. Richard stared at the bench as if the furniture had betrayed him. Brian's mouth worked around words that had nowhere to land. I felt no rush of triumph, only the clean click of something finding its place. Outside microphones clustered again. Jasmine guided us through them, saying little, offering calm phrases about stability, staff retention, commitment to the city. Reporters who had come hungry for blood left with a different headline forming the woman who kept the lights on, while the old guard fumbled the bill. Back in the war room, Laura stacked the exhibits and exhaled for the first time all day. He'll try something else, she said. Cornered men do. Then we stay boring and relentless, I answered. We run the hotel. We let professionalism be the story. Twilight burned across the river, turning glass towers into embers. I thought of the first time I'd stood in that lobby as a child, tracing the veins in the marble with my finger, believing permanence was a promise. Now I knew better. Permanence is a practice. We stepped into the corridor at the same moment Brian stalked past, eyes lit with a feverish resolve that felt colder than any disappointment. His shoulder brushed mine like a challenge. He didn't look at me when he spoke, voice low and venomous. Brian storms out, hissing, "This isn't over." Meanwhile, Elaine slips Claire a folded note. He's getting desperate. Be careful. They thought shutting me out would end my story, but it became the reason I built an empire. From my office on the 41st floor, the skyline shimmered like a kingdom carved out of glass and ambition. Aurora Hotels had crossed oceans now. London, Singapore, São Paulo. The Regal in Chicago, once my family's fortress, now stood as our flagship, a blend of restored grandeur and modern nerve. Every quarterly report confirmed what I already felt: the exile had become the foundation of everything. Yet triumph never arrived unshadowed. The call came on a muted afternoon. Elaine's voice was steadier than years past, but the words caught in her throat. Richard was in the hospital, his heart finally failing after decades of pride and cigars. He's asking for you, she said simply. For a long moment, I stared at the skyline, at the river, threading through the city like a scar. Then I told her I'd come. The hallway smelled of antiseptic and quiet grief. Machines hummed like tired witnesses. Richard lay smaller than I remembered, shoulders slumped, face pale. His eyes fluttered open, and for the first time in my life, I saw them without armor. You built what I never could. He whispered, voice cracked with regret. I sat beside him, fingers curled around the rail. You gave me the foundation, I answered softly. Even if you never meant to. His lips trembled, the words fighting their way out. At last they broke free. I'm proud of you. It was late years too late, but they landed like a verdict that released us both. When I left, Elaine squeezed my hand. She no longer needed to choose silence. Brian's story had already collapsed. After the courtroom disgrace, he fled to Florida, chasing a restaurant venture that folded within months. The industry forgot him, as it always forgets men who confuse arrogance for vision. His name faded from trade journals while Aurora's grew larger each season. Elaine found her own voice in the aftermath. She joined me as an honorary advisor, not to run numbers, but to remind our teams that heritage can be gentler than hierarchy. Together, we launched the Margaret Marshall Scholarship, named for my grandmother, designed for young women in hospitality who carried dreams too heavy for tradition to carry. At the first ceremony, rows of students filled the hall, eyes wide with the weight of possibility. Cameras clicked, speeches echoed, but when I stepped to the podium, it felt like speaking to my younger self alone, dismissed notebook full of foolish ideas. I told them the truth, that rejection carves edges, that betrayal can become blueprint. And then I gave them the line I had earned with every scar. Sometimes when they close the doors on you, you build your own hotel chain with doors no one can shut. Betrayal had tried to silence her, yet every humiliation became fuel for an empire that rose higher than her family ever dreamed. Justice came not with fanfare, but with contract's truth and the steady courage to face those who once cast her aside. When injustice is met with unwavering resolve, the final verdict echoes louder than the cruelty that caused it. No wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. If you felt the power of this story, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Type 1 if you truly resonate.